Welcome to the Zachrilege Cast podcast, YouTube video interview program that features me talking to some of the best and brightest in the atheist slash secular slash awesome community. This is episode number 53. We're recording live on April 15th, and we're recording Friday night, so a little more of this than usual. We'll get to the exact beverages in a moment. Thanks to Trav from the By Any Means podcast for being on the show 2 weeks ago. One good interviewer, them, not me, deserves another. So tonight we go to the surprisingly fertile atheist fields of Grand Rapids, Michigan, where we find two skeptics. We have Chris Hanna and Christopher Tanner, who created a supergroup where they decided to talk about almost anything. As an example, their latest episode features a Batman vs. Superman review that is shocking on two levels. It's positive, and it refers to humanism. They also cover breastfeeding, should we get the feels for those deaf people here for the first time videos, and the Panama Papers, which I was shocked to find have nothing to do with rolling a fatty. Welcome aboard, Chris and Christopher.
Thank you so much for having us on tonight.
Well, I'm glad we could put it together from the two Cellars, Grand Rapids. I don't even know. So we'll do a little quick tour. So I'm drinking New Holland's Cabin Fever. That's their kind of winter beer that may not be available anymore. And a Bell's Cherry Stout, because Michigan beer is good stuff.
It is, but I'm not a big beer person. So you can ask Hannah. I'm not one to imbibe in too much beer. But I like the whiskey. I like the whiskey a lot.
And he always carries it. He always carries it in his hand. Everybody always in.
I do. Tonight it's the small batch Bullet Rye, 95 proof. So if you guys have never ever had this before, you should go out, purchase a bottle, $25.99 here in Michigan, and it'll warm you right up.
I like that as an ad.
Well, when he really likes something, he likes to pawn off, and then maybe one day they'll hear us and maybe they'll sponsor us. It'd be pretty awesome. I'm just rolling with some cheap Svedka and grape juice because budgets. I'm not really rolling with any good beer or anything. I haven't had basically cleaned myself out every time I go, and I can't not slam them and have them all. So I just got some cheap stuff for the night.
Well, that's good. You want to pace yourself when you get started for the evening. Now I know, I believe it was. I'm going with the Tanner and Hanna tonight. Apologies in advance, but between the two of you, so Tanner, you have the religious background, and Hanna, you're kind of like me. You're kind of like never really caught on. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never had anything. I basically started off with in a Christian. Sort of. My father was Presbyterian light. He didn't practice or go to any kind of church stuff. He just grew up in a house that called themselves Presbyterian, so he has just some sort of deistic belief. My mom is pretty Jewish. Her family was Orthodox, and so we celebrated Hanukkah and got 8 crappy presents, and then had Christmas and got a pile of good presents. But I always wondered why the heck we did them both, and we had the synagogue and the church that my grandparents and everybody went to, so there was always options and variety. I never really stuck to any of them because they had contrast. Mommy was like, doesn't really think that Daddy's Savior is real, or the one. So I had contrast, and I just kind of never locked down and slammed into one particular point of view. And it was a good thing in the long term through college and everything when I realized that atheism was a thing as opposed to just like not caring. I used to call myself an apatheist because I just didn't give a rat's ass.
Yeah, I could see that. Although I like the combo, so you get like twice the gifts. That's not too bad.
Yeah, but the Jewish gifts are like stationery and pens and like dreidels. It's not the same as like the big commercial success that is the winter. I guess agglomeration of all the different pagan rites that Christmas is.
It is the super holiday, much like you two are the super group. So, Mr. Tanner, what was your kind of religious upbringing? I can speak.
Yeah, so for me, I grew up a very conservative Baptist, so I had a very controlled upbringing. My father was a deacon of the church. I went to a private school, It was a more liberal school, actually, than our church was, but we went to a very conservative style school. So I was raised in young earth creationism. I ate, breathed, slept, drank, whatever you can imagine, Christianity my whole life. So when I was 6 years old, I asked Jesus to come into my life in a parking lot of a Kroger's. And if you listen to the show, I'll tell you, I actually tell the story because I don't remember much outside of sitting in the back seat of the car and my mom, crying because I'm, becoming saved. And I was baptized, I think, when I was 8 or 9 years old, and because that was kind of a requirement of the church. I was very, very active in the youth group. I used to protest outside of abortion clinics. I had been on missions trips. I went, I think I've been on more, well, probably not more missions trips than the two of you combined, but maybe. And so, I've been to Canada. We went to Canada to witness. I've been to Canada, Mexico, all these different places. And so I spent a lot of my life in the church, and then when I was 15, I moved up to Michigan to be closer to family. My dad took a job at Steelcase, and we moved up here. My dad did not take a deacon role, but they got a little bit of active involved inside of the, I don't know what you want to call it, the youth group at the time. And that's when I started going to public school because they couldn't afford the Christian schools up here. And we went to public school. I started hanging out with people that were more diverse. I actually met my first atheist friend, who at the time I didn't know was an atheist or didn't care to know he was an atheist, but he was. And he was also bisexual at the time. And again, it was nothing I knew. And so he introduced me to this whole different environment. And it kind of opened my whole world up. It was this big shock. And then I started to question. And, so when I was 16 years old, the first thing I questioned was, why is God against LGBT people? This seems stupid, And then it kind of went into, well, hold on. Some of the science doesn't make sense. This isn't what I was taught. I was taught the canopy theory. Canopy theory isn't existent. I was taught evolution is stupid. And wait, evolution makes sense. And everything kind of just spiraled until I was 18 when I kind of just said, all right, hold on. I'm going to walk away and do my own thing. And then I spent about 10 years independently researching what I felt was correct. I lived with a gentleman that was a Buddhist. I lived with a friend that practiced Hindu. And, I went through all the motions of learning all the other religions. And then I lost my job at the end of 2011. And it was one of those breakdown moments. You go back to church, you're like, holy shit, I don't know what else to do with my life. And I've lost a job. I'm, struggling. I had to cash my 401k out. I've got kids out of wedlock, and I've been married once, divorced, engaged to another person who's an atheist. And at the time, we never came out about what we were, we believe. It was never a thing for us. So I went back to church and for a Christmas thing and thought, this is what I'm missing. I'm the wayward son. I'm that story in the Bible that everybody thinks about. That's me. I need to come back and start going to church. Well, of course, I don't get up early on Sundays. I wasn't going to give up drinking. So, it was kind of one of those things where I didn't know where to go. And all of a sudden I got a new job. And I decided to go back to school. And then my wife was like, she was like, hey, you should listen to this podcast. I think you'll feel better. And I listened to Seth Andrews. Within a week, I was an atheist. Within 2 weeks, I was challenging every single family member online. Within 3 weeks, I was yelling at people. And within 4 weeks, I was crying because I wouldn't exist or ever see my grandfather again.
It's a lot of ground to cover in a short period of time.
Yeah. I'm like the emotional roller coaster.
I was thinking, when I hear Seth Andrews talk, I'm like, I'm glad he's on our side, because he's, quite a solid radio voice he's got, quite a persuasive fellow.
I can't imagine how effective he was when he was a Christian broadcaster. I mean, he must have been incredibly charismatic, incredibly useful to bringing people over and soothing their fears and calming and getting them into the music and the Christian music and maybe assuaging some of the horrible nature of Christian music copying just about everything that they do.
There is a lot of that going on, but yeah. But it's your story. It's not his story. So, how did this show get started? Because I see you're like lower than me on the number of shows, but I feel like you've been podcast biz for a while. But how did this group get started?
Well, we'll put it this way. So we met separately from the atheist circle, from the podcast circle or the YouTube show circle. We actually met separately from that. Ironically enough, when I came out as an atheist, I didn't know what to do with myself. It was this research of podcasting. Listen. Don't know what to do. Oh, no, I need to get actively. And honestly, I'd been actively involved in LGBT circles, trying to be the best ally I could be. And I helped form a small group, in Allegan to help people come out. I tried to work as greatly as I could with a lot of different LGBT groups. But I didn't find that was my passion at the time. All of a sudden, my passion shifted to atheism. And so I started listening to Dogma Debate, ironically enough, and Dogma Debate led me to want to volunteer. I started volunteering to do research for Dogma Debate for about, 9 months. And then there was a gentleman named Johnny Brotherton. Well, in the meantime, I wanted to get active locally. And when I decided that, there was a group called Michigan Atheist, which is a segment of American Atheist. And there was a lady who is now, bless her soul, passed on. But there was a lady that introduced me to Chris Hanna. So I sent an email to some random website, and she goes, you know what? There's a guy that lives right next to you. If you don't go meet this guy, I think you're going to do yourself a disservice. This dude is awesome. He messages me all the time. He won't leave me alone. And nobody else in Grand Rapids seems to want to hang out with him. So Hannah and I randomly met at an art festival downtown, one day, and we just started hanging out after that. And next thing you know, I started working with a gentleman named Johnny Brotherton, who ran a web show called Atheist Analysis. And at the time, they were just broadcasting, and I seen him in groups. So I started joining these atheist groups, and all of a sudden I started seeing all this spam, and I would keep getting messages. Well, all of a sudden he's like, hey, I got Seth Andrews on. I was like, well, fuck, that's my ticket in right here. I'm going to watch that shit. And he interviewed Seth, and I listened to it, and I decided that I wanted to get more involved, and he ran an interview and offered me a PR position to help him get guests. So I thought, what better way to get into the movement, to try and work with other people that are like-minded, and to do something different than I had been doing with Dogma Debate. So I started working with them, and it ended up leading to a co-host position with Johnny, and Johnny and I would co-host the show. I would bring the guests on. I would set up basically the rundown for the show, and then Johnny's like, hey, do you know anybody that can blog? And I was like, yeah, my buddy Chris, he blogs on his own website, but he's not real popular, but he's really, really, really awesome to read. And Johnny's like, oh, bring him on, let's interview him. So I don't even know if you ever did a real interview, Chris, but next thing you know, Chris is blogging for us. Then next thing you know, Chris is running the blogs. He's managing, 10 bloggers plus himself.
Yeah, we had 23 different people that I was managing. They were writing, almost 15, 20 blogs a week. It was a ton of work.
And so we transitioned into that. Well, I did that for about a year and a half. And then Hannah and I, started talking about, where do we want to go with this? What do we want to do? YouTube and video is not my thing. I'm not going to say audio is my thing either, but, YouTube, I was struggling with the YouTube format because it's very visual, and people don't like the talking heads all the time. And I used to do 3 to 5 hour shows. So you can imagine, do you want to stare at two people's heads for 3 to 5 hours? Probably not. 1 hour, nobody, we used to get an hour worth of viewership, and then after that hour, everything just plummeted. It was just downhill from there. And so, I decided to transition out of that medium, and Hannah says, hey, why don't we do something local? Let's try and affect change locally versus, doing it with somebody that's far away. And so that's kind of how Cellar Skeptics was born. We decided, let's do a podcast, because then I don't have to deal with video. He doesn't have to deal with video, and we can still do somewhat the similar that we used to do, but it gives us more of a freedom that we can actually engage with each other, and I can go to his house and beat his ass if he doesn't answer his damn cell phone. So, that kind of worked out. I couldn't go beat Johnny's ass. If Johnny ignored me for a couple of weeks, I couldn't do anything about it. But Hannah, I know where he lives. I can go to his house anytime I want and pick up a baseball bat and practice my swings.
Well, that first time that we ever hung out, too, Arlene, the director of Michigan Atheist, she said, you should talk to this guy. He emailed me just like you emailed me, and so I emailed him, or he emailed me. I don't remember exactly how it went, but we hung out at this art festival just to walk around thing. Grand Rapids has lots of festivals and stuff. It's a very festival-friendly city, and we actually got into it with street preachers holding signs. The very first time we ever met, there's street preachers out there with children, making them hold signs, and we were, just doing the street preacher attacks, and just I'd never done that really before, and Tanner was ready to rock on that. So, and then once we did the blog and stuff, it was just we've been working together with a lot of stuff. So the podcasting's a little bit easier to edit and stuff. there used to be a ton of work to do all the video animations that Tanner does. So the podcasting stuff, we can do a little bit more, a little bit higher quality, but we don't have to worry about the video aspect. So maybe in the future we'll add some more videos and do short, quick snippets and stuff. But for right now, we're sticking with just audio format.
Yeah, you do have to do the bells and whistles, you know. And there's this weird line, like it's like you're a YouTuber or you're a podcaster. And I don't know. I feel like there's plenty of room for both, isn't there? So how did you two kind of work out the format for your show? Like what you had in mind when you got started, and now what it is after you've done. We had 26 episodes.
Yeah, we just finished the 26th. Basically, the format is kind of like we try to do a couple of things that are happening now, and maybe a few things here and there that are local. But we do a lot more political stuff than we used to. I've never been into the religious debates. I've never been in that world. I don't have a lot of background in it. I have the Skeptics annotated Bible, and that's basically my resource for this kind of stuff. But I don't know. I didn't grow up in that world, so I can't really debate and go beyond just basic scientific analysis. And so I always talk about science. I'm a mechanical engineer, so science is the area that I always talked about on my little YouTube show, Heretical Minds, back in the day. And Chris brings, the history in the religion, and he knows a lot more about the religious stuff. So we kind of bounce back and forth off each other. We'll do crazy stuff that he used to believe, and I just simply look and ask him questions in shock and awe of some of the crazy things that used to be normal in his life. And then vice versa, he'll let me go on a complete nerd rant from time to time about some really boring scientific thing, and he asks questions trying to break it down into layman's terms.
You can definitely tell when we've been drinking a little more because the science segment at the end of the night. So we try and record everything in one night as much as we can. And so if you listen, you can actually hear a progression of drunkenness sometimes. Not every time. Let me tell you, we don't always get shit-faced, but every once in a while, towards the end of the night, you could tell we recorded the science segment last, even if we make it segment 2. So you'll be listening, and all of a sudden you'll hear me slur a couple of words, or Hannah will slur words, or I'll make fun of him for something that you would go, that's kind of juvenile. Why would you say that?
Yeah, that's why I tip my cap to anyone who does the 3-hour show, because I'm like, well, if I did a 3-hour show, I'd have to have like a cooler with me, and it would not be pretty after a while.
We try to limit it. Sometimes we're like, okay, listen, last time we did the show, and then Tanner will go back and go through the edits, and I'll send him all the files that we record separately in our computer so we can just kind of mix everything. He's got some awesome gear on his rig, and he's like, man, I don't remember a couple of things we were talking about, and I was like, oh, well, I'm pretty sure we may have touched that. We got to go back and listen to it, make sure we got everything down. Then we got just that we don't have any. Cause we'll usually have something like, oh, we messed up on that scene, so we'll edit, and yell it out. So if you listen to our show and you hear us yell edit, that's a spot we missed to clean up on the.
Well, I always hear it's kind of like promoting secular feminism. Anytime somebody screws up, it says edit that. They're like, no, they're not doing that. And I kind of like it when people don't end up being too slick. Because most people doing this have day jobs, and it does take a lot of time to do it. I had to edit once, and it drove me crazy. That's why I do these live hangouts. It's like whatever happens, happens. So we're going to do a quick rundown of your show so people can, understand what Cellar Door is all about. First of all, what's the name about?
The name. Well, there's a little bit of history to the name. So the new job that I took last year, I have about a half-hour drive now, whereas before it was like 10 minutes. So now I have about a half-hour drive each way, and then I have to take my boys to school in the morning. So I'm in the morning and I'm searching around, and we were like, okay, well, if we're going to start a new show, we don't want to do something that says atheist in it specifically. And that's kind of why I admire your show, because you use your name, right? You use your name directly in it, and so it kind of works in a whole different dynamic, because you're not just saying, hey, I'm only going to do something specifically atheist. I'm going to do something where I can have a broader spectrum. And I think that's where in atheist analysis, when I worked with Johnny, him and I kind of failed in that aspect, because when we tried to branch out and do other things, we got pigeonholed quite a bit. And it was really hard to get out of that pigeonhole. And so, we would do we did all these interviews with atheists and stuff like that. And then when we tried to branch out and wanted to do some science, or we wanted to do current news, it was a lot harder, and we had a lot harder time gaining views based on that. So when Hannah and I were developing this, we're like, okay, well, what sounds good? And I was like, well, I heard this thing on this movie one time, and on this movie, it kind of said, the most beautiful word is cellar door. And so I'm sitting there thinking, okay, marketing, right? How do we market? I got to figure out a way to market because we're starting from scratch here. So we're going to start from scratch. This is a word I like. It comes from a movie that is one of my favorite movies of, I would say, probably all time. And it just kind of came from there. And then Hannah's like, well, let's not use the atheist term. Let's use something different. And so then what I did is I think I put a list of 100 different names of all these different variations and said, pick one of these motherfuckers, and we'll do it like that. And then he picked a couple of them, and then I sent them to my wife at the time, and I was, or same wife now as it was.
She still is, yeah.
But I sent at the time I sent it to my wife. See, grammar is important, and when we drink, it kind of fucks it all up. But anyway, at the time I sent them over to my wife, and my wife says, "Well, I really like this one. This one kind of has a catchy ring to it." And so then we ended up taking the second one. So.
Yeah, well, I had known the cellar door terminology. It's usually attributed to J.R.R. Tolkien. He's one of the first people that a lot of people heard say that cellar door is the most beautiful, I guess, either saying or dual words or single statement in English. And there's an entire history of the reasons why, and it's really deep and really vague. I mean, it goes even further back, but Tolkien is the one that's usually attributed to it. So I knew the idea behind it. I had seen the movie Donnie Darko, which is the one that Chris is referring to. So I like the idea of having a name like. The reason I mentioned I didn't want to do the atheist thing when we were talking about it was you think of shows like the Magic Sandwich Show or something like it's got it's its own unique thing, and it's memorable, and it's something that it is its own thing. It's not just pulling off the shelf of atheist and then something, and it's not to take anything away from shows that use that, but we just wanted to do something a little bit different, like Chris said, to keep from pigeonholing and maybe give people a little bit of mystery as to what the hell the next week's show is going to be about. And so we ended up going with that. I thought it was a little bit more fun and a little bit different. So that's obviously it worked out. We both agreed with it, both liked it.
And Hannah makes all the decisions. So.
Oh, come on. I depend so much on Chris he has a little bit more free time. I had a small business, and I have just been slammed 60, 70, 80 hours a week with work. So it's just I've been trying the best I can to do the social networking and stuff, but it's tough, man. We both have pretty heavy duty full-time jobs, and when you're trying to make something work and you're trying to grow your podcast, it takes a lot of time. And I got a newborn daughter as well. She's 6 months old, so squeezing it into life is tough.
Well, I'm not sure if you're going to catch up. I think you might not reach Tanner levels. But congratulations.
Yeah, but I have 4 kids.
Sticking with the show, I haven't quite finished this little questionnaire, but this is kind of just a get to know and in a little more specific terms. But okay, so you do say you record with Hangouts, but you actually just do it as an iTunes podcast, right? Or a podcast on many podcast catchers, pretty much.
Yeah, so it depends on, how about this? It kind of depends on the week. Lately, my work schedule has been 55 hours a week, and Hannah's been working about 75. So, lately it's been a lot harder for us to sit in the same room. Our goal originally was that we would sit literally, I have some shows you can see him in the back. Well, you can't see him because I don't have video, but if I release the video to the shows, you could actually see him sitting in the background. So what we do is, depending on whether we're farther away, what we do is we start a Hangout, and then we record separately. So like I'll record my audio on GarageBand, he does his on Audacity. And then what I do is I go in to another program and I sync the two together, and I edit each of the segments separately, and then I add them to the main show. So I have like a template that I basically use. So when I first started, I had to develop this template. So when I first started, I was spending about 15, 20 hours a week editing. And then by about the 4th episode, I was down to about 5 hours a week editing, because you got to re-listen to yourself and you got to edit out. Hannah said when he drinks, Hannah says
So bad.
So if you listen each week, you can actually, and I challenge listeners to do this. If you want to listen each week, you can pick out how long I edit based on how many ums and ahs Hannah says. The week I don't edit as much or I don't have as much free time. He says probably about 20 to 25 times. When you get it around 10, you know that I've spent more time editing. And so what I'll do is I'll merge the two audios together. But then something like this, he's not here, he's sitting at home. So for something like this, if we were recording for our show, what we would do is we would just run the Hangout and record separately versus together. The only time we use the Hangout is if we had a guest. So, let's say in a month, if I say, hey, you know what, Zach, let's come on our show, let's talk to you for a little bit because I think that would be interesting. And, what we would do is we would record the Hangout, and then what I would do is just take the audio from the Hangout and make it into a podcast. And I'll edit out. So, like, Hannah's mic isn't as nice as my mic, so I have to edit his audio a little bit more than I would mine. So I'll take the podcast or the Google Hangouts audio, and then I'll segregate all three of the tracks. And then what I'll do is I'll separate them, and I'll edit his differently than I would yours or versus mine.
A lot of work. And that microphone comment, I'm sure he wasn't talking about anything else. So you're totally cool. So do you record a special hour?
At a special hour? We pick Fridays.
Early.
Currently, we do Fridays for the most part. We do Fridays or Sundays because we're atheists and we don't go to church, and we're gluttons for punishment. Hannah works every day of the week. I don't work on the weekends. So on Friday night, we get drunker, or I get drunk. He usually watches me. And then on Sunday nights, we're a lot more sober and to the point.
Yeah, we used to do it on Thursdays, and we'd be drinking, and we'd be hanging out, and then Friday we were both just zombies, and it's just too hard. It was too brutal, so we were just Fridays or Sundays, and Fridays sometimes I'll get home at like 2 something, and it's time to get up at 6:30, 7 o'clock, and I'm just a dead body. But sometimes you just gotta sacrifice your personal well-being for the online atheist community, right?
That's right. Giving up for the team. So do you do cursing or not? I feel like I've heard cursing on your show. On this show, yeah, people were like, can I curse? I'm like, it's whatever, really, I'll let the guests lead. You say fuck first, and I get to say, yay, thank you. So I think we already answered this, and we usually by the time I get to this question, it's already been taken care of. But so do you drink during recording, and are listeners encouraged to, providing they are not operating a motor vehicle at the same time?
Yes. Yes to all of that. Do not operate while you drink. You can listen to us while you drive, but just be very careful because towards the end of the show, you can definitely tell the alcohol has caught up with us. So I'm I don't know. Hannah's a lightweight, I guess I would say.
Dude, I'm 155 pounds and 5'9". I can't really slam a whole bunch of stuff. It just doesn't happen.
But we'll tell a little secret that very few people know. We only share this at the beginning when we first started, but we used to do a Jaeger bomb before and after every segment. So if we had 3 segments, that was 6 Jaeger bombs each. If we had 4 segments, it was 8 Jaeger bombs each.
Huh. This is wow. It's so appropriate that my next question will be because I wanted to talk because in your last episode you talked about Batman versus Superman. And I just watched this Steve Shives review in which he actually, I believe, drank live on camera a Jaeger bomb before talking about the poor experience he had with that movie. But I don't really dig on superhero movies just because I didn't read comic books as a kid. But what gets me at those movies, just because they all kind of follow a template, is like I just was in New York City and I was at the 9/11 Memorial. And at the 9/11 Memorial, you can watch what happened on that day. You can see real buildings go down. And in the superhero movies, like, it always ends up in a big climax where they're just blowing crap up left and right. And it's hard for me to connect with that. I don't know. Is that something, does the Batman Superman movie do the same thing as the first Superman movie where we're just going to blow a bunch of crap up?
Okay, I'll be honest. I see it as a different motive. Now, how about this? I didn't watch the first Superman movie. I'm not a Superman fan. I only went to this because my kids wanted to go to it, and I am a Batman fan. I'll admit I'm a Batman fan. I'm a big Batman fan. But for me, what it came down to is you're right. The older I get, the more it bothers me. The older I get, the more I think about if this were real, right? I know it's not, but if it were real, could that be my kids? Okay, so there's billions of people in the world, right? But if that were my kids, that just happened to get killed, if that was my wife, if that was my family, if that was my father, if that was my daughter, if that was, anybody that I was friends with, would that bother me? Well, yeah, that would really bother me. And then I kind of go to the next progression of, well, okay, hold on. If they're humans, right? If they're other people, would that bother me? Are they innocent individuals? Yeah, that does. And I think, in my opinion, I think this movie addresses that very aggressively. At the opening of the movie, you see Bruce Wayne looking up at the building, and he goes and he grabs this girl from getting crushed. And at the beginning, he goes, where's your mom or your dad? And she points up to the burning building, and he just looks up and he's like, what the fuck? And all of a sudden, then you see Superman coming through, killing whatever the hell that other god's name is. And you just sit there and you think about that. And as a father, I go, holy shit, what if that were real? And then that's what that whole movie to me was. It turned in, and whatever other people see it as, I don't know. But for me, it completely turned into a morality argument, A, and B, it turned into how much regulation is too much regulation versus what we should be doing to protect our people. Because when you look at 9/11, right, it's an atrocity. How many people died? Thousands of people died. And those are people that are just like us. And that could have happened to us. I don't believe there's a God that says, well, you're safe, Chris. I think that could happen to any of us. And it bothers me to say, where do we got to draw that line as individuals, and where can we do that while still being the best humanists possible? Because to me, protecting life is the best and biggest interest that I have. And I have a hard time the older I get with war and even going into other countries.
Well, Chris has just explained why he is the absolute most fun to watch superhero movies with. That's the most serious explanation that I've ever heard. Like, when we went through the segment, we didn't plan on going through that segment about Superman. He just told me, he's like, yeah, I watched Superman, and I kind of got a different feel than what everybody expected. I didn't think it was a terrible movie. I haven't seen it yet, but I was kind of happy to hear that it was a pretty adult movie. It was pretty serious. I don't like, as I got older, the same situation kind of, is I don't like the really childish superhero stuff, which is magic superpowers, a Michael Bay version of superheroes where they just blow everything up, fire, explosions, buildings destroyed. It just doesn't interest me anymore. I guess it's being jaded from the special effects. I like a serious storyline, and then you can throw some special effects on it to make it better, but the core of the story has to be the most important thing. That's one of the reasons why I like the Nolan series Batman so much better than anything that's been happening of late. The story was the most important part, and the actors and the acting were the most important part. Then everything else blowing up was kind of like, okay, well, we'll make the movie better with this. It sounds like that new Batman versus Superman movie may have that, but I've also heard the other end that it kind of emo, and that people took it as like this mope fest. So when I see it, I'll probably be able to formulate my own ideas, even though Chris kind of spoiled a few spots for me already.
Way to go, man. Way to spoil Superman versus Batman. You're the only one.
Put a trigger warning on this thing, don't you?
I didn't mind hearing about it. And I kind of agree with the Batman, just in a way that, like, who's the director before? Jack Nicholson played the Joker. You knew he had to take, like, 7 hours to put on that makeup. But Heath Ledger actually did it looked like he put it on himself. And the Jared Leto goes back to I must have been sprayed by 20 people to get...
Tim Burton did the Jack Nicholson Batman, and the new Suicide Squad, Jared Leto, like he goes full comic book with his styling. So we'll see if he goes like completely like the insane Joker or not. But I'm interested in the new Suicide Squad. We'll see if that turns out to be as good as it is, because everybody's looking to see who plays Joker, and if they do it as good as the last person who did it, because let's face it, it's one of the best bad guys in movies of all time.
And you have this it was like the movie The Crow, because the lead actor like died during filming, and adds like an extra layer.
Brandon Lee.
Ledger, like, if he had lived, would he have won the Academy Award? Maybe, but it added another layer, and it was like a sad layer, of course, because you're watching someone live who is no longer with us. But yeah, I was a little worried that they were overreacting, because like Batman and Superman got such bad reviews, and they're like, oh, we're going to reshoot this new movie that's coming out in a few months, and it's like, that's probably not going to end well, but who knows? They're burning money. I mean, it's not like it. I don't know if it's going to make money, but it's definitely doing just fine.
That's one of the interesting conundrums that I've seen. I've seen a lot of negativity as far as personal reviews, like people going to see it, and critical reviews are negative. But that movie has made its money back. I mean, it has made its money back already as far as the box office is concerned. When it comes to DVD sales and online sales or whatever, it's going to make a little bit of money. It's not going to make a ton, but they've basically broken even on the balance sheet. And surprisingly, they have a huge swath of negative. I believe they're a splat on the Rotten Tomatoes listings. It's just a major surprise that they've managed to get enough people to go see it, even though it's had such negative reviews.
And I'm surprised that I'm like 53 episodes into doing this, and this is the first time someone's doing the funny hat thing on Google Hangouts. So
I know. I'm sorry. Yar. Why would nobody else do that? Like, that's the best part of it. Hannah, what was the show when we were back with Atheist Analysis? We did one with Jennifer Lovejoy, and maybe you weren't on it. I did one before we went to the Michigan Atheist Convention. So we spoke at the Michigan Atheist Convention, I don't know, 2 years ago, and there was an episode I did about starting, how important conventions are. And how, in my opinion, actually smaller conventions, localized conventions, are actually more important to the atheist community. And I'll be honest, I still think that. I'm not against Reason Rally, nothing against it, but I do see the desire to come together locally, more. And that's the biggest thing that, for me, that I see is that. And anyway, so the actual funny part of the story was we got Jennifer Lovejoy. Who else did we get on? Well, we had Brian Fields, Bridget, we had Bria on, and
yeah, I remember that show now.
And then next thing you know, we were drinking to the point that it was like 1 in the morning, and then then it was 2 in the morning, and then it was 3 in the morning, and then we're so wasted. I mean, we were all wasted. Broadcasting.
We ended the broadcast, I believe, and then we all just stayed in the hangout for at least 2 more hours. And by the time everybody had finished their 6-packs of the bottles or whatever the hell they were working on, and it was just a big sloppy mess. It was glorious.
I remember doing a random hangout where I just said anybody show up, and then like 6, 7 people, and we talked for about 2 hours, and I even stopped recording, and it just happens. Yeah, the only conference I've gone to, ReasonCon, which was in Hickory, North Carolina, which is about 4 hours from here. And I was kind of sad they're not doing it this year, which kind of makes sense because of ReasonCon. I'm a little bit nervous about that idea of ReasonCon. I mean, DC is not too far, not too terribly far, but just the fact that there's going to be, I don't know, what did I say, 60,000 people? It's like, how do you kind of meet up with a smaller group?
Yeah. Well,
I like your idea, Chris, that the small things matter. I think those are really important. That we get smaller groups of people starting just to hang out. I mean, that is a really important thing because we can all kind of look and be the armchair activists and the armchair sharing things on Facebook. But when you finally make that actual physical step into a small group, small hangout, you put $5 into a cover fee for hanging out in a group of like-minded people. It makes a difference and it changes. It just changes what you do. That small step, it's amazing how much of a difference it is. But it's just that when you leave the house and you go into an event, it really does make a big difference.
Yeah, and actually that's the first time I ever met you, Zach, was at ReasonCon that year. So
sweet. So many people at ReasonCon that I said hi to, and then I'm like, damn, we should have talked more. But it just was it was crazy. I mean, I've never had an event where I think I had met 2 of the people at the conference in person before, and probably 100 people that I had met online. So it was just, and you didn't necessarily know what anybody looked like at the time. It was like, hey, look at you, hey, what's up? Yeah, it was a good time.
Well, it is, and that was actually my first atheist convention outside of the Michigan one. So that was my first out-of-state convention that I'd ever been to. I'd never been to anything before that. It was never, I don't know, because I always kind of saw them like church. I have a hard time with the Sunday assembly, personally. It's not for everybody, but I have a harder time with it just because, for me, it reminds me of church. And I was afraid conventions would remind me of when I used to go to conventions as a Christian, all the time. I remember, being 15, 16 years old, going out to Washington, D.C. on a bus to this like mega stadium. And I remember the girl I was dating at the time broke up with me because I was interfering with her relationship with God. And then, but I'd already paid for all the tickets.
Oh no, cock blocking God, that's rough.
It was.
We've all been there.
And then so then it was awkward because it's like, man, I already paid $300 for my ticket and my stay out there. What am I gonna do? And then she's like, well, maybe we could get back together. I was like, oh, well, then I'm definitely going to go. And so, then you go, and then afterwards she breaks up with you because you're... But, I was afraid these conventions would be like that. And then I was afraid that, I've seen the science. I've read the information about how, you put a bunch of like-minded people together, you can stimulate the neurons of the senses, and, people are going to get a feeling, and, that's part of the reason, actually, why I'm not a Christian anymore, honestly, is because of one of the big experiences I had. And but I look at that and I just want to be very cautious that I don't fall into that sheep-like mindedness again. I don't want that. That's not where I want my life to be. I want to be able to be diverse. I mean, I still hang out with people that believe, outside of my family, and I still have long conversations with people that are Christians, and I just don't want that part of my life to change.
Well, you do want to still be able to have conversations. That's one thing I struggle with. I got to do this show. I'm like, well, I'm talking to like-minded people, but I think one of these weeks I need to bring on a Christian and see how it goes.
You should. I would watch that. I enjoy, just so everybody knows, that's like a guilty pleasure of mine. I love that shit.
I've never been into the really intense conversation, like debates, but I like conversations with people as long as the people that you're having the conversation with have a little bit of a background in, I guess, education and the basic arguments and stuff. Not so much like apologetic arguments, but if they're arguing for a Christianic God, or they're arguing for the Judaistic God, or possibly even the Islamic God, or if they believe that it's all the same God, whatever, as long as they have a little bit of education and background, because they need to be able to meet you somewhere in between. So, like, usually they can teach me a few things about what the Bible says, and then we can refute it or talk about that, and I can teach them a few things about science. But if it's a closed-minded, one-way conversation, it's not fun for anyone involved, and it usually ends up poorly. And I just, the majority of the conversations that I've had outside of my family have always been it ended in anger from one side of the group, because it's just a one-way conversation. So it's nice to see cool conversations as long as people are civil. That's one of my old co-hosts from Heretical Minds, when I was doing my little show, he was a psychology major. He's finishing his second master's degree, and he's working his PhD and stuff, and he was so laid back, and he had a degree, an actual theological degree, so like he knew the background, and so when we have conversations, he was he's partial and calm. It always reminds me of the thus spake Zarathustra argument that Nietzsche put out, and the different levels of the believers. So you start off with as the angry lion, or you start off as the camel, the beast of burden, carrying the weight of society on your shoulders, and then when you finally break free from those chains, you become the angry lion, or the angry atheist, just attacking and fighting, and then you become the baby, ready to learn and grow in society. And Chris and I think, have both kind of passed that angry portion, and we're ready to have conversations and learn from everybody, and maybe even meet in the middle ground somewhere. And those are like cycles that I see a lot, and I like speaking with people that are on that third end, that are like, okay, let's do this, and let's try to find a solution, as opposed to just yelling at each other.
Oh, but it can be fun to yell at each other. But no, it's good. I mean, like your debate that you had, presuppositional, it's hard not for that to go into you're just talking over each other and trying to get points, and it's like we're not in a boxing ring, we're not winning 10-9 here. But I thought I'd throw little questions out back and forth to the individual hosts. I want to ask Mr. Hanna about dephilosophy. Maybe I had too much to drink to say that correctly, and why people should be sensitive to differences in the community and your own kind of background.
Not so much. Basically, the death philosophy thing was something that I always really liked, the philosophical arguments when it comes to leaving the sciences and just learning about what different philosophers said. David Hume and John Locke, Thomas Hobbes. These are people that I was introduced to when I was in college, and they're amazing logicians. And I never really got into logic too hard, but I really do like different philosophical arguments. I've been working with Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil lately, and and obviously I'm a deaf person. I'm 85 to 90% deaf. I started off at like 50% when I was younger. We touched a little bit about this on our last show about sharing videos and whether or not it's bad to share videos of people hearing again for the first time or hearing for the first time. I don't really have a lot of sensitivity specifically for my hearing. Everybody always does the same things when they hear that I'm a deaf person. Do you know sign language? What does this mean? And the other one is, can you read lips? And obviously yes. And they always say, and if anybody's watching a video and they can see what I said, that everyone knows what the hell that is. But other than that, it's just I don't. The deaf philosophy thing was just something that I started off as a blog, just looking for a cool, interesting name, something that was a little bit different than Atheist Chris or something like that. And so that's basically why I went with that. And I started writing with that and through Atheist Analysis. And since we've started Cellar Skeptics, I've just stuck with Chris because I don't know, it seems less sanctimonious, I guess.
Good to know. And to Mr. Tanner, do you feel like you're still trying to make up for your Christian past and being a fundamentalist? Do you think you have to? Is there anything you have to make up for?
I think there's a little bit of that in there. I'll be honest. I won't say that hasn't been somewhat of a driver, for me as an individual, but I think some of it comes down to with the way my upbringing was. I was, somewhat of a, activist in some aspect of my life, right? I spent a lot of time protesting. I spent a lot of time, doing these different things. And I think that's somewhat was ingrained in me as a child that, these are the extra things you do with your life. And, it's funny now because in my family, out of all the kids, my sister is not super active in the church. I hope I doubt she'll ever listen to this because she doesn't like even my podcast. So she's not an atheist, but she's as close in my family as one comes. And my one sister, she stopped being active in the church quite a bit ago, for the most part. My second sibling down, my sister Sarah, she's very active in the church, or was until she got pregnant, but she's super active, like aggressively active in the church. She's a youth leader. She goes on missions trips. She volunteers at every church event. And then my sister beneath her has really no interest in it. It's not, she helps out, but it's not her thing. She doesn't go to church very often. And I think it's just one of those things when our family, that's how I grew up, and the longer that my parents were around, they're like, well, this is a lot of fucking work. We're not going to do this shit anymore. We're gonna scale back what we are. So I think some of the activism side of me, or the desire to talk to people, to have that conversation, doesn't all stem just from a need to make up, but it stems from the desire I have, the way I lived my life for so many years. It just was ingrained, in me.
Yeah, but now you're good at protesting, or you have this experience, so you can try it on the other side, right?
Yeah, in reality, yes. And I've like I said, I've done a lot of other things, honestly, than atheist activism. I'm pretty active in the LGBT community, a little bit less this year than last year, but I get pretty active in the LGBT community, and I am very active in the decriminalized community. I'm very anti marijuana laws, and I think that a lot of marijuana laws, especially in Michigan, are used to hold minorities down. And we could talk about that, because people think that's a conspiracy theory. People think I'm buying into some big fucking conspiracy, and the statistics show not. And our group, the group I volunteered with, actually demonstrated a $2.5 million savings to the city of Grand Rapids in police forces and jail time and beds needed when the majority of the people they were arresting were young minorities. And so anyway, so I do a lot of other activism outside of just atheist activism, but this one's a little bit closer sometimes to home than the other ones are.
Well, one of the things we also want to do with atheists, or with us, we did a little bit with atheist analysis. We want to do more with Cellar Door. The weather's finally getting warm. The cold's finally dissipating from Michigan. So we want to do some outdoor activism stuff. We want to do, some drives, maybe a trash pickup, maybe a book drive. I would love to do a science book drive, or a fundraiser for science books for some of the more impoverished city schools that we really have some school cities that are just in rough shape when it comes to science education and math education, and maybe even do a tutoring thing. With my background in mathematics and physics, we could do something along those lines. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to do the local stuff, is we can maybe do that in our future, and I would call that my form of activism. I've never really been out the protesting, never been out for the petitioning, but I would really, really like to do something where there's a physical benefit to society, and I think that would be a good way to do it.
I have to say, sorry, this is out of left field, but I've noticed that a lot of atheist activists, besides being pale, also have beards. So, Hannah, I don't know if you qualify on that level either. Just saying. The beard thing. See, this is the video only. Yeah, I've been growing for 2 days. Yeah, I can't do a beard. It doesn't work for me.
I just recently got rid of it. I had a goatee for, I don't know, a couple of years or whatever, but I just recently trimmed it all down, and my daughter had never seen me without facial hair, and so I had a couple of days where she would cry when I hold her and stuff like that. But no, I do the pale thing because, hey, I don't want too much skin cancer, and I am a fan of basements and cold. But other than that, yeah, no, I can't grow a beard. If I let my beard grow in, it comes straight out like Joe Dirt. It turns into a mullet and side chops. Like, there's no real beard happening on this face ever.
Well, it's good to know your limitations. So Tanner, who's the wily veteran of the child rearing, and Hannah, who's new at it, what's it like kind of raising kids as an atheist? I mean, have you had any pitfalls there?
Honest. That's what sucks. You have to be honest. My kids ask me God, or they don't call me God.
That would be amazing.
Awesome.
That was a fuck up.
Refer to me as God, Mr. God.
Oh, that would be like exactly what every apologist says. Like, oh, atheists all want to be God. Oh, man.
So, I'll tell you what. It was weird. It was a weird transition. We'll put it that way, because I went from being non-religious / open to anything involved in woo-woo shit. I used to believe in ghosts, so that's part of our podcast. I used to go ghost observing, so everybody knows, but for me it was really weird, because I went from kind of parenting the way my parents parented to not liking some of the aspects of their parenting, to not understanding. I mean, I remember, 5 years ago with my son saying, you know what, if you do this again, I'm going to make you read the Bible for the next 2 hours. And now I look at that and I go, why the fuck would I ever do that? Why the hell would I want my kids to read this shit? Like, all right, I guess maybe if I want to torture them, maybe I'd fucking do that still. But back in the day it was different. But now it's really weird, because I have to be honest with them. And it's funny, my son calls me out. I have a 14-year-old and a 13-year-old, and then I have a 7 and a 5-year-old, 2 boys, 2 girls. And my one son, he'll call me out sometimes. He'll be like, "Hey, that doesn't make sense, Dad, and let me tell you why." And it's like, all right, yep, you're right, fair enough. And then the other son will do the same thing, except for he's a little bit. I have one son that's a little bit more in the Christian realm, and one that's more in the atheist realm, ironically enough. And so it's just kind of weird, because you have to kind of go back. I have to bounce back and forth. And one of them I can talk with no kid gloves on. I mean, we can have open discussions about it. And the other one I have to be a little bit more careful, because he's very sensitive about it. But parenting-wise, I'm open to the science on things. I went from spanking my kids when they were little to I don't spank anymore at all. I don't agree with it. Now the science shows opposite of what I grew up with. I use different methods of discipline with reward methods that I never grew up with either. My parents didn't reward me. It was you'll fucking do this, or God's going to punish you and smite you from the fucking earth, or you go to hell, or your dick will fall off. I mean, I've had that before too. Or
that's a new one.
Yeah. Well,
that's some mommy dearest stuff right there. No wire hangers. Oh, man.
Yeah, you don't want to masturbate, and when I was a kid, masturbate And here's an off-topic tangent, right? When I was a child, my dad worked in IT, so we had an ISDN line. So everybody else had, dial-up fucking internet, and I had 128K internet. So my image is loaded in 1 minute versus 5 minutes.
And 1 minute is all it took. Good work.
It was, especially when you're that age.
You forget about the old, the dial-up days and how it was all kind of text-based, and now it's like, how come my video didn't pop up in half a second? What's going on?
That's a Louis C.K. moment there. It's like, why didn't this just, it was weird for a second. Like, dude, it's going to space. Give it a second. And it's where most of the communications come through. It's like, and on top of that, most of the things that you say, like, does anybody really need to actually ever hear ever? You talked about the thing that you thought about Axl Rose or something. Louis C.K. has an absolutely great bit about that, and airplanes or something. I highly recommend everybody check it out.
It's all good. So sometimes you guys get into having guests on. So what are some of the favorite guests you've had on your show, and who would you like to get for future shows?
For me, Abby Smith. I want Abby Smith back. She was I heard her at a conference remotely. I didn't go to the conference. So I heard her on a conference, and then I heard her on Seth Andrews' show. She was big into the whole vaccine movement, not debunking it and stuff. And now she's actually working on HIV vaccines, ironically enough. That's what her job is.
Yeah, she's a virologist.
There you go. Yeah, he's the intelligent one. I'm the guy that drinks too much. And, but for me, I would love to have her on again because she provided a good conversation. She was entertaining, and she was extremely informational. And she wasn't boring like Hannah. Like when Hannah and I do science segments, sometimes I fall asleep while I'm sitting here. If you ever hear that's my forehead hitting the mic because Hannah he went on some long rants, but it was so boring that nobody gave a fuck about it. But when Abby talks, she has a way of engaging people. She's a very good orator, and for me as an individual, I enjoyed her as a guest, and so one of the and you can cut me off if I'm talking too much. So we started drinking here, and it just kind of goes from here. But for me, when we had the podcast, I always liked the science stuff on Atheist Analysis. That was a big thing for me. And Hannah always did the science on his show. His whole show was science, and I was very jealous because Johnny, he didn't get into the science, and but I liked it, and I liked the evolution stuff. And for me, it was when Abby came on. She was a less known guest. She wasn't some famous person. And that for me, that was more relatable. She was able to have an actual conversation, whereas some of the guests that we've had on is really hard to relate to because of status level compared to mine. Abby
Smith was she was at the Oklahoma Atheist Convention, I believe it was. I can't remember the specific name of that actual convention. It's actually the location where Seth Andrews came out the first time he came out. I think the next year she was there speaking basically why vaccines and why viruses are really, really good things. So it's an awesome. She was a great guest. I read her blog from time to time and on Facebook and stuff. She's always got great stuff. But two people for me, the biggest one that we ever had, because we haven't had too many guests on Cellar Skeptics, the time that we got to speak to Lawrence Krauss live on air was absolutely freakishly amazing. I got to ask him about gravitational waves and whether or not they have been discovered, and he said about 1.5 years, and not too recently we had discovery and verification through a different, not the BICEP 2, through a different measurement group. So that was amazing. But for me, I guess a guest that I would love to have that I don't think will ever be able to manage to do it. I like talking about different stuff besides just the science and ever. And my ultimate musical, I guess, inspiration of all time, and he's also got a ton of stuff in the non-belief area, is Burton C. Bell from Fear Factory. He has been one of the most intelligent songwriters, and from what I know, he's a bit of a he has an ego. But I love the fact that he's always been just intensely mechanical and non-belief writing wise, and so I think he would be an amazing guest in the future if we don't ever get Lawrence Krauss again, which would be all nerd boy science squealy out of me.
Yeah, I can't imagine you could sit still during that one. Had to be a good one. Well, my coughing's getting kind of crazy. So When you meet up with Paleocrat Radio in person, who picks up the check?
Why do you want to know that? Did they claim they picked up the check every time? Is that how it works?
I'm just curious. I know you guys there are only like 5 people in your area, so come on, they have to be close, right?
We share it. How about that? We share. That's about it. We don't actually go. Jeremiah's not. We don't go out to the bar. We either hang out at his house or my house, really. And Hannah comes over once in a while.
Yeah, it's whoever's house is, whoever's hosting. If someone brings something in, you throw something in the fridge, and everybody can have a little bit of it. But you provide as best you can. And so, like, if you're hosting, you put together a little bit of a mix, and you make dinner or make some food or something. Like we watched some of the debates in the past and stuff. So it's just being a I guess a homely host, bringing any kind of foods and whatever, and then that would be considered the check. Now that we're getting older and we don't bar hop like we did when we were younger and all that.
Just wanted to see, you'll have your. I don't know. I think your shows are, because you do cover a wide range of things that aren't the same stories you hear on every other show. It's refreshing to hear, and definitely between the two of you, I don't hear a lot of overlap there, but there's definitely the politics and the science that you don't always get. So I appreciate that. And I often think of like all the guests I've had on my show, and if like we all lived in a really big cul-de-sac and just hung out at each other's houses and drank and watched shows and stuff, would be pretty awesome. So one of these days,
maybe we'll start an atheist commune.
Oh, I like that. That's a nice one.
Let's go find a state. We got to just find a state and clear a little bit out of the state, and then we'll just build this big-ass commune, and we can all hang out, and it'll be cool.
A compound, yeah.
I'm kind of a... It's a socialist in me. I don't know what to say.
Man, the socialist and the libertarian inside you must constantly battle it out every night. Like, it must be like a battle royale in your brain before you're going to bed. Is that why you got the bullet whiskey out, to quiet both of them down so you can finally get to sleep?
Yeah, the voices sometimes speak too loud.
I like that. You get to, after a little bit of drinking, you get to hash it out, which is lovely. So before we call it a night, where can people find you online, and just where they can find you individually and the show, Cellar Door Skeptics?
Well, you can find us on Twitter, and I'll be honest, I'm not as big on Twitter as other people are. I don't.
I've learned that.
I've had a harder time relating to Twitter. It's really hard when I get like 70,000 news feeds versus the 1,000 I get from Facebook. It's just so hard to process, and it's just so much. And like I'm a clickbait. I'm a clickbait person. Like, I don't want to be, but you put a good headline out there. Shit, man, there's Chris going down a rabbit trail, and you can ask Hannah, because our 2-hour recording sessions sometimes are 6 hours, because we'll be talking and all of a sudden I'll say something and it'll go boom off the trail. But anyway, you can find us at on Twitter at Cellar Door Skep. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. You can find us. You can email us at cellardoorskeptics@gmail.com. We do have a website, cellardoorskeptics.com. It's not super fancy, but it's about as much as Hannah and I can manage on our budget. And you can also find us on Spreaker or iTunes. And if you're going to go to iTunes, please subscribe to the podcast. Throw us a rating, 1 to 5 stars. And just give us a reason. If you give us 1 star, hey, we like the constructive criticism. You can send us hate mail, too. Send that more to Chris Hanna at cellardoorskeptics@gmail.com, because, he's the guy that has to deal with the shit more than I should have to.
We also have a couple of other some of the social media groups. We have some stuff on Pinterest. We have stuff on Flipboard, which is a great app and site for really getting tons and tons of news data. And so we've been trying to just bounce around at that. And obviously the Twitter stuff. I've got my handle at Chris Hanna at Chris Hanna, and then we have Cellar Door Skeptics. And Chris is Christ in some numbers. I've always loved that.
I'm Christ 0583. That's my personal Twitter handle.
It's a sad side effect with the Chris Tanner and not taking the rest of your last name out. So an atheist.
Hannah? I told you the reason why. So when I was the first major job I ever had, they used to have first names, and then they would put the last initial, and that was like your email address. Well, they abbreviated my name from Christopher to Chris, and they put T because my last name's Tanner. And so my email address was christ@kssenterprises.com. And the company owners were Catholic. They were both like staunch Catholics. And I'm talking my first day, I got a phone call from my boss going, "What the fuck's going on? Why the hell is your email address Christ?" I was like, I don't know. I didn't pick what they assigned me. Don't yell at me, please. It's not my fault. And he's like, "You better fucking figure out how to change it." So I had to email the IT guy being like, "Can you please help me fix this? I'm getting a lot of flack for this." So when I started Twitter, I was an atheist at the time, so I thought it would be funny to use Christ just for shits and giggles, hoping maybe in reality somebody will pick up on my Twitter because they looked for Christ, and then I'd be able to engage with Christians, and that really hasn't happened much. So, but that was
You didn't get the tweet of God, so that was the one that you went with second.
Can only dream. Okay, well, I will have, as usual, all the links available in show notes for everybody on iTunes. So we'll get connected and all that. So if you want to support this show, you can be like Bobby, Hugh, and Teody, Men of Distinction, and support me on patreon.com/Zachrilege. And that's Zachrilege. That's my BAC check at the end of the show. Can I spell my own show? And I can. So follow me on Twitter, like my Zachrilege Cast page on Facebook, and send all hate mail to zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. Thanks to Christopher and Chris for being on tonight. And stay safe. If you need the chat, I'm available. If you're an atheist and feel alone, you're not alone. Please reach out and let's chat and get that human connectiveness that keeps people coming back every Sunday. Stay skeptical. I love all y'all, and good night.